Hi everyone, welcome to Epic Chess, the channel that helps you improve your chess fast. In today's video I want to teach you how to attack while still making great positional moves, and to do that I want to use this game played in the Cork Chess Congress between Bernard Boyle with the white pieces and Thomas Lane with the black pieces. And as we go through this game, we're going to see 10 key attacking concepts that are demonstrated really nicely here through this short game. So white kicks off with pawn to d4 here. We have pawn d5 in response, bishop f4, and this is the start of the London system, an early development of the bishop, but it does have some points to it, one being that it's immediately fighting for these central squares. And so this is positional tip number one related to attacking chess. Still fight for the centre of the board, because if you set yourself a good platform in the centre, it can help you then launch an attack later in the game. We have knight to f6 developing, pawn to e3, pawn to e6. Now black is blocking in the light squared bishop here, but this is a respectable system if black intends to play b6 and bring the bishop out this way into the game. We have knight to d2 developing, pawn to c5 striking at the centre, pawn to c3 defending, and we now have this pyramid of pawns in the centre of the board, which is the typical setup for the London system, a very solid setup that can then be used to launch an attack later in the game. We have knight to c6 from black, now knight g to f3, again white is developing his pieces, and this really brings us on to our second top positional tip when you're attacking, is develop your pieces into the game like you would in any position. The more fuel you can throw on the fire when you're attacking, aka the more pieces, the more pawns you can launch into it, the better, so still develop your pieces early in the game. We have bishop to d7. Now I don't love this move from black, it's a bit passive, the bishop isn't going anywhere from this square and it's just going to be hit by a later knight jumping into e5. I think a better way to play here would have been to develop the king's bishop to d6 and then look to get castled, and at a later point think about playing b6 and bishop b7. So black plays bishop d7, we now have bishop to d3, more developing. And the third top tip here, which I like about the white development, is that if you have a bad bishop, you should seek to activate it by bringing it outside of the pawn chain. So we can see here that the bishop on f4, although this is technically a bad bishop because it's on the same colour as its own pawns in the centre, because it's been brought outside of the pawn chain here, it's now been activated, and so it can either be traded off for a black piece, or it can potentially be a dangerous piece in its own right later in the game because of the fact that it's been activated. And I did do a video on bad bishops, so do check that one out if you haven't seen it already. We now have pawn to a6, and here's a really nice calm move by white. So although he's been developing all his pieces into the centre of the board here, he now takes a time out to play pawn to a4, gaining some space. And so this is my fourth top tip when you're attacking. Look to gain space, because then you cramp your opponent and it's a good place from which to launch an attack. And not only does he gain space here, but my fifth top tip is anticipate your opponent's threats. And here black had a small threat of playing pawn to b5 and gaining space on the queen side of the board where he could then initiate counterplay. We have bishop e7 from black developing, and again this highlights the problem now with this bishop to d7 move earlier, because it's blocking the development of this bishop to the d6 square where it would be protected by the queen. And on e7 it's just a little bit passive, and when we look at these bishops here for black, they're really in quite a sorry state of affairs. When you compare them with the white bishops, we can already see that there's a very big advantage building for white here. And white now jumps straight in, capitalising on it. He doesn't see the need to castle straight away because black doesn't have any active pawn breaks in the centre where they can get at the white king. So instead white plays knight to e5, occupying this e5 square and moving that knight into a dangerous outpost. And this is my sixth top tip, which is that knights belong on outpost squares. So there's a really nice outpost square on e5 here, and so white simply jumps straight in and occupies that outpost. And we can also see that the other knight on d2 could potentially join the fight later in the game by coming via f3 into e5. Black now trades in the centre with pawn takes on d4, and it's a bit of a nothing move really. The problem here for black is he just doesn't have any counterplay on the queen side or even in the centre of the board, and meanwhile white is really building up strongly in the centre and later looking to play on the king side. So we have e takes d4, and again, positionally speaking, this is the right move because now it opens up the e file and white can later occupy that e file with either a queen or a rook and add more support to this e5 square. It also prevents this c file from opening, and therefore once again this move also seeks to limit the black counterplay, so it's dual purpose in that respect. We have castles from black, and now a nice move from white. The obvious move here might be to simply castle, but instead white sees that he has a big space advantage, his pieces are better developed in the centre, black has just castled, lending itself to an attack on the king side, and so white plays queen to f3. There are other good moves here, such as already launching the pawn storm, but instead white decides to immediately bring his queen into the danger zone, and this is my 7th top tip when attacking, is bring your queen into that danger zone, because it's one of the key attacking pieces, and very often vital if you're trying to launch a checkmating attack. We have rook to e8 from black. Again, this continues a theme here of kind of shuffling the pieces around the back two ranks, but not really playing with an active plan in mind. And again, I'd refer you to another video I've made on how to make a plan in chess. Really, your moves should be connected with a wider strategy so that you're not just shuffling like black does in this game, but you're moving your pieces to the squares that will then support the plan you're trying to execute upon. And here white now initiates the 8th really key attacking idea, which is the use of a pawn storm. So white plays pawn to g4. And this move is justified in this position because we can see that black doesn't have any active threats against the white king on e1, and therefore pushing the pawns like this is perfectly sound, especially because the white king can always run away to the queen side here if it needs to, and white also has a lot of pieces around the king, giving it protection if it was needed. So we have pawn to g6. Again, black really plays into the attack here, which isn't great. I did do a video on how to defend in chess, so do check that one out if you haven't seen it. But one of the principles discussed there is the fact that you don't really want to start making weakening moves in front of your own king, especially when your opponent is attacking you on that side of the board. So this is really just walking into the attack now, and the writing is on the wall. So we have pawn to h4, simply carrying out the plan here. Bishop to f8, pawn to h5, bishop to g7. So I mean, this has been a really sorry set of moves from black. Rook e8, pawn to g6, bishop to f8, bishop to g7. 4 kingside moves that have done nothing to generate counterplay and simply walked right into the white attack. And so this is why black is now in all sorts of trouble. So white simply chops this pawn on g6 now. Black recaptures with the h-pawn, and obviously we can see by this move that white has now opened this dangerous h-file. And this really starts the process of removing the defenders from around the black king, and this is my 9th top tip when thinking about attacking, is remove the defenders from around the black king, because as soon as you strip the king bare of its defenders, then you can pile in with your own attackers and launch deadly attacks. Now the bishop on g7 is serving a defensive purpose in this position. It's stopping a checkmate on h8. However, if the white queen, for example, were able to land on h7, then we can see that that would be quite a deadly check. And so it begs the question, can this knight on f6 be removed in order to free up this square to attack on? And this comes back to that top tip just given of removing the key defenders around the king. So white simply plays bishop to g5 here, hitting that knight. We have knight to b8, again a completely nothing move here, but this game's really more of a demonstration of how white can attack effectively, especially in these London variations when black sleepwalks into a passive position. We have queen to h3, piling up on the h-file, and now there's a very simple threat to take the knight, and after recaptures, we jump in and give a deadly check. Once again, black is unable to react to this properly, although by this point the game is completely gone. So black plays bishop to c6. We now have knight d to f3, bringing another piece into the attack. Queen to b6, hitting this pawn on b2, but really it's all far too little too late to try and generate counterplay at this stage. So if you want to pause the video in this position and have a look at what the winning combination could be, then please do so. White simply chops the knight on f6, bishop recaptures, queen jumps in giving the check, king f8, and then it's mate in 1, supported by that deadly knight on e5, queen f7, checkmate. And this is my 10th top tip in this position, is if your opponent tries to generate a threat against you, as black did here against the b2 pawn, If you have an even more deadly threat, which white clearly showed they did on the king side, then you can ignore your opponent's threats and simply carry out your own. So never just have a knee-jerk reaction of responding to your opponent's threats before going on with your own plans, because sometimes your own plans will be more powerful than your opponent's, and therefore you don't actually need to respond to their threats. You can force them to respond to yours. So I hope you enjoyed this game on how to attack in a positional manner. A really nice miniature here in the London system. Definitely a great opening to try in your own games if you haven't already. As always, thanks very much for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, share, subscribe, and I hope to see you again on another video.